All right, so we are first going to start talking about connective tissue, which has some characteristics that are in contrast to epithelial tissue. So first, if you remember let's use red. The epithelial tissue arose from the endoderm and the ectoderm. Whereas connective tissue is endodermal and mesodermal. I don't think we mentioned this yesterday, but there are connective tissues that arise from the mesoderm as well. So the difference there being some of these come from the mesoderm, some of these come from the ectoderm. Both can arise, or different tissues arise from the endoderm. All right, I have a little picture there depicting this is areolar connective tissue, loose connective tissue, and stratified squamous epithelium. And you can see some stark differences. So first off, the cells here, these are the little cells, okay, are much more spaced out in connective tissue. And that means they're going to have lots of extracellular space. Whereas in the epithelial tissue, the cells are packed together. And so there's really no extracellular space. So filling in this extracellular space in our connective tissue, we have what we call the matrix. So the fluid that the cells are in is the matrix. And there are fibers running through there as well within the matrix, and the cells are within the matrix as well. Okay. So just by looking at them, you can see then, all right, this is epithelial tissue. All these cells are packed together. Okay, there's no space between them. We don't see it floating around in a matrix like we do in the connective tissue. Connective tissue also is highly vascularized. What does that mean? Right, lots of blood. Except for cartilage does not. So cartilage acts a lot like epithelial tissue. In that it receives nutrients from a blood supply that's far away. So down here you can see blood vessels in the dermis. Okay, and those nutrients will supply to kind of the basal layer. But there's no blood, or there's things diffusing from there, but the blood is not directly in all the layers of the epidermis.
So cartilage is part of connective tissue, however, it's just not vascularized.
Yes, right. So similar to epithelial tissue in that they're both not vascularized. Okay, so now we're going to go through the different tissues within connective tissue. No, I believe those are collagen. Maybe some of these dark ones. Yeah. So the big thick ones in the back are collagen,
Okay.
and I think the darker ones are elastic, actually.
Okay.
So in comparison to these, though, reticular would be like thicker and then even more
Oh, okay.
non-directional, I guess. You can see these dark fibers in here that we're talking about. Those look like elastic.
Okay.
And then the big thicker ones in the back are collagen. Start with loose connective tissue. And there are cells and fibers found in different abundance in different types of tissues, of connective tissue and loose connective tissue. The fibers there's three types. There's collagen, elastic, and reticular. Okay, and you may remember some of these from lab, right? Collagen is thick, and pretty straight. What'd you say? Elastic is thinner and also has branches coming off of it. And reticular is very branched and kind of scattered in its patterns.
Is that the one that's also 3D like?
Say again?
Is that the one that's also 3D like when you look at it?
What do you mean by 3D?
Like it looks like it's.
Look like it has. Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard it described as that before, but yeah, it looks like it comes out at you, I guess.
What was the word you used to describe how reticular is shaped?
Thickly branched and,
X-like?
well, it's not necessarily going to be an X, you know, it can, but they have lots of branching and it doesn't seem to form any sort of like pattern, like it's not going in any direction. Whereas elastic, there's still kind of, there's some branches off there, but it's still kind of going in a similar direction, yeah.
Would the picture that you have in the slide before be?
Oh. Okay, if you go to the slideshow and then you go to the reticular tissue from lab, you can see it's very distinct. It just looks like, I think I described it in lab as like rebar in concrete, but less organized than that. So, all right, we have 5 different cell types then within our connective tissue with different functions. And 3 of them start with M. Mm-hmm. One of them starts with F and one starts with A. So, okay? All right, so we've got fibroblasts. Okay, and the fibroblasts, they secrete the fibers. We have adipocytes, which are filled with lipids. Okay.
That's responsible for muscle-to-muscle connectivity, right?
No, so you're thinking of aponeuroses, but also starts with A. So these are just small fat cells.
Yeah, oh yeah, adipose tissue, fat cells.
There you go. You got it. Connections. All right, we have macrophages. All right, these are immune cells. We have mast cells. These are for inflammation. blanking on the last one. Thank you. I know. Well, I have one. Family balloon. All right, and then we have our mesenchymal cells, which are our stem cells. Okay, which are undifferentiated. They can turn into all the other types. All right, so what defines the loose connective tissue is what type of fibers are running through it, and then what type of cells are present, and how many, and how they're spaced, and things like that. Yes?
Okay, what do you mean by inflammation of mast cells? Like, are they like an immune cell that rushes out of
So they signal for inflammation.
Oh,
Okay, so they're there. You'll see more of them in when inflammation is present. But yeah, they are. You could say they're an immune cell, but they're specifically for signaling inflammation.
This is kind of a weird question. Are hair follicles made of mesenchyme?
Our hair follicles mesenchyme. I don't know. I'd have to look that up. But mesenchyme is a precursor tissue, right? So it developed into the sheath around it is going to be connective tissue. So originally it was mesenchymal, and then it has matured into a connective tissue, and then an epidermal. The hair part of it is epidermal, an epithelial tissue. So bone also comes from mesenchyme originally. So this is a kind of like a stem cell, but the mesenchymal tissue is what's laid down first, and then the tissues mature from it. Does that make sense? But yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know all the specific tissues in the hair follicle. Yeah. Okay, so we have a few different categories of loose connective tissue. This is connective tissue proper, which is why I have that up there as an acronym. Connective tissue proper. That's my alarm sound. Am I dreaming? Usually my dreams are I'm late for class, or I've showed up and it already happened. Same, right? All right, so areolar connective tissue. All right, this is generally found near epithelium and is an inflammation tissue as well. So it's for absorbing fluid when inflammation occurs. And so when you see areolar tissue, again, if you want to go back to that PowerPoint, you can see there's lots of space between the cells. It looks like it would be able to take on a lot of fluid. So areolar adipose tissue, right? So we just talked about adipocytes, which are the cells filled with lipids. You combine those together, they make adipose. Okay, so this is fat storage. Okay, there's two kinds of adipose tissue. We have white and brown fat. Okay, and I'll talk about brown fat in a second. But most of your fat is white fat. Brown fat has a lot of mitochondria in it, so it's for burning energy or making heat. Okay, so we have areolar connective tissue, adipose, and, man, why am I blanking today? Elastic? Reticular, there you go. It's the hurricane. I'm just worried. All right, reticular tissue, which has that very specific fiber running through it, has those reticular fibers. Okay, all scraggly in there. I should have put a picture in there. Okay, and reticular, those fibers, what they do for reticular tissue is generally found in areas which have a lot of lymph. So a lot of these white blood cells will actually gather within that reticular tissue. So these are found in lymph nodes and in the spleen, some of the areas. Yeah.
So what do they do? I mean, like the adiposis fat storage reticular is just.
So reticular tissue, we'll just put lymph. Is where you can find it. Associated with lymph, which is a fluid with a high concentration of white blood cells, important for your immune system. All right, so I wanted to talk a little about brown fat. Okay, so brown fat is found in high concentration in babies because babies don't shiver. I don't know if you've noticed that. But instead, when they are cold, they can burn this fat that has high energy and lots of mitochondria in there, so it can go through lots of cellular respiration cycles at the same time. And that will, a byproduct of that will be heat. Okay, they thought that, or for a long time we thought that once you're an adult, or once you grew out of kind of toddler infancy stage, that your brown fat deposits disappeared. Okay, and so you mostly just had white fat throughout your body. But in a few different types of x-rays and a couple other things, they noticed that some adults have brown fat. Okay, so we're going to watch this video which gives you a little more information about what brown fat does for you. Okay, this is pretty dense, kind of a dense video, but it has a lot of good scientific references for what brown fat can do for your health, essentially.
Until about 10 years ago, brown adipose tissue was considered to be biologically active only in babies and small children, generating heat by burning fat. But there is now no doubt that active brown fat is present in adult humans, involved in cold-induced increases in whole body calorie expenditure, thereby they control body temperature and how fat we are. In 2013, researchers showed that one could activate brown adipose tissue if you chill out people long enough. 2 hours of cold exposure every day for 6 weeks, which can lead to a significant reduction in body fat. Although they demonstrated the effective recruitment of human brown fat, it would seem difficult to increase exposure to cold in daily life. Thankfully, our brown fat can also be activated by some food ingredients such as capsaicin, the compound that makes hot peppers hot. Whereas increased physical activity is usually recommended to increase energy expenditure, specific food components such as capsaicin are known to burn off calories and fat. A significant rise in energy expenditure within 30 minutes of eating the equivalent of a jalapeno pepper. Normally, when we cut down on calories, our metabolism slows down, undercutting our weight loss attempts, but sprinkling a third of a teaspoon of cayenne pepper powder onto our meals counteracts the metabolic slowdown and promotes fat burning. They wanted to try giving them more to try to match some of the studies done in Asia, but they were working with Caucasians, and there's a difference in maximum tolerable dose of red chili pepper between Asians and Caucasians. Take some Japanese women, you can boost the fat burned after a high-fat meal too, adding over a tablespoon of red pepper powder. We've known for decades that cayenne pepper increases metabolic rate, but we didn't know how. But now we have studies showing that this class of compounds increases energy expenditure in human individuals with brown fat, but not those without it, indicating that they increase expenditure straight off the bat. And there's all sorts of structurally similar flavor molecules in other foods like black pepper and ginger we expect to activate thermogenesis as well, but they haven't been directly tested. All these results suggest that the anti-obesity effects of pepper compounds are based on the heat-generating activity of recruited brown fat. Thus, repeated ingestion can mimic the chronic effects of cold exposure without having to freeze ourselves. Consumption of spicy foods may help us lose weight, but what about the sensory burn and pain on our tongues, and sometimes in our stomach as well as further on down? So are our only two options for boosting brown fat to freeze our legs or burn our butts? Arginine-rich foods may also stimulate brown adipose tissue growth and development through a variety of mechanisms, which just means eating more soy foods, seeds, nuts, and beans.
Okay, so you have some options if you want to utilize brown fat to help you lose weight or just maintain an increased metabolism. So you can expose yourself to the cold. In the experiment, there was 17 degrees Celsius, which is that cold. That's like 50 degrees.
It's like 40, high 40s, 17 Celsius.
Yeah.
Something ice high 40s.
Or you could put ice packs all over your body. Well, you don't have to put it all over your body. Actually, they did another experiment where they just put it on their legs for a while, 20 minutes a day. No, cold exposure. An ice bath would work, right? 20 minutes a day, and then you'll increase your body fat and also burn it, okay? Or you can eat spicy foods, okay? So if you add cayenne pepper to everything. Or you can eat arginine-rich foods such as soy, legumes, nuts, and seeds. And it increases your metabolism, so you could eat more, or you could lose more weight, or anything with that. What's that?
Basically, go to Mexican grill.
Yeah. Ask for this. It's not very spicy, though.
Spicy adobo sauce.
Do we have some spicy sauce? Put that on. There you go. And after doing this for, a month or so, you should have brown fat deposits built up in your body. Whereas if you don't have cold exposure, you don't eat spicy foods, you don't eat a lot of nuts and beans, then you're just dealing with white fat, which has a much lower metabolic rate, essentially. Any other questions on that? Yeah.
So after time, the white fat gets replaced with brown fat, therefore it's easier to lose weight because, so I don't understand, so you're gaining fat, you're gaining this brown adipose tissue, but then you're just reburning it, but what happens to the whitey fat?
So essentially, your metabolism stays higher. If you're just burning white fat, you can do the same daily activities with burning less calories. If you're burning through brown fat, you're burning more calories as you do the same things. So, if
like turning your white fat into brown fat.
yes, that's what this will do. So it'll activate thermogenic metabolism, which will have you start making more brown fat, which will burn through your brown fat stores and continually cycle. Is there a hand up over here?
Sort of. So does this have any tie to like white and brown meat?
No.
Circulation.
No, dark and white meat. Well, they're the actually same thing is it's darker because it has more mitochondria in it. So similar to why the fat is darker. So it's more mitochondria. It also has other things in there as well as more myoglobin, which is for oxygen storage. But
And muscle growth, hemoglobin.
yeah. Yep. All right, but I thought that was an interesting aside there to our adipose. All right, so moving on. So we had loose connective tissue. which is part of connective tissue proper and dense connective tissue. Our two types are regular and irregular. Regular dense connective tissue includes tendons, ligaments, and our other A word, aponeuroses. Okay, which is attaching bone to muscle, bone to bone, and muscle to muscle. All right, so these in dense regular connective tissue, if you remember from the slides, the fibers are all kind of running parallel to each other in the same direction, because you have this tissue and that tissue, and you're just stringing a cord essentially between them. Whereas irregular dense connective tissue, this is for capsules around joints. And so the fibers from irregular dense connective tissue are going in all different directions so that it can withstand forces from all different directions. So we'll mention that in lab as well. Yes?
So all the regular tissue, tendons, ligaments, and aponeuroses,
They're all regular dense connective tissue, parallel strands.
okay.
Irregular is irregular.
And why did you say it does that? They go in different directions?
Right, so it's forming a sheath around a joint like your knee, okay, which moves in many different planes. And so it's not just connecting one thing to another thing, it's protecting it from all different angles. Yeah. So again, form and function. Yes?
That would be like your labrum kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah. I labrum. Okay.
Out of place or been moving a lot, is it because the capsule is not strong enough, or?
Could be, yeah. You could have the capsule around it isn't, the irregular connective tissue, but it could also be the synovial capsule between them is wearing out. It can be a lot of different things, but that could be one thing. All right, our second group then is supportive. Oh, sorry.
It's okay. So when joints, like.
Okay, so cartilage then is part of our supportive connective tissue. We have three types. Hyaline cartilage, good example of that is in your ear. Fibrocartilage, a good example of that is discs in your knee, which sit on top of your tibia called the meniscus. Okay, this is a common injury is to have a torn meniscus. And elastic cartilage, it includes the tracheal rings. So you can feel them in your trachea. Little rings, well, I don't know if you can. Got a lot of stuff there, but maybe down here. Little rings in your trachea which keep your trachea open are made of elastic cartilage. You have a lot of other cartilage in the way here, which is mostly hyaline. But yeah, you won't feel it. Never mind. Okay, but these are supportive, but also flexible, right? Your ear, is not going to break. It'll bend as needed. Yes?
So is the reason why it hurts more when your cartilage is pierced than just in skin because of the support system that it is creating?
No, that has to do with just the nerve endings there. Okay, so you have more pain receptors in different areas of your body. All right, bone, another supportive connective tissue. We have two types. We have compact bone and spongy bone. And we'll get more into that when we talk about bone next couple weeks.
Compact bone is a type of supportive tissue, right?
Right, so it's another supportive connective tissue, bone. But essentially, compact bone is very hard. So the outside of your bones is all compact bone. Especially the hollow parts of your long bones. Okay, but spongy bone just has more space between the cells. It forms these spacious networks called trabeculae. Okay, basically kind of looks like a sponge. And these are often on the inside. Okay, not on inside all bones. But they are like between the inside and outside of your flat bones. So between the compact bone in your skull, you have spongy bone in between. You also have spongy bone on the ends of your long bones. Yeah.
So if they're fractured, that would be the compact, like your bones, right?
Right. So you could fracture the ends of your bones, but most of your breaks are going to be, in the compact bone.
Is that TRA?
TRA, yeah.
So is the spongy bone always underneath the compact?
Yes. There's going to be a compact layer around all your bones. Spongy's not going to be on the outside. You can't see spongy bone unless you
Go inside.
cut it open, somehow, or break it off. But not all bones have spongy bone on the inside.
Okay.
Yes.
Is spongy bone like bone marrow?
So within the spongy bone, you will have red bone marrow. Okay, which is where hematopoiesis occurs, so where blood cells are first made and then released into the bloodstream. If you have compact bone without spongy bone in there, then that's where yellow bone marrow is made, which is mostly fat. Which is why dogs like to eat bones. They like to eat the marrow out of the middle. Yes?
So are there compact ones that don't, or bones that have compact but don't have spongy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, parts of it. So, for example, your long bones, such as like your femur, the long shaft has yellow bone marrow in it. The ends have spongy bone with red bone marrow in it.
So typically, like if the bone's skinnier, then
If it's longer, skinnier, I guess.
And why is it that they go up? And why does some have spongy and some don't?
Well, as you grow older, you don't need all of your bones making red blood cells. And so we use it for fat storage, I guess. That's a hard answer. That's a hard question to answer.
Okay.
But it does. Yeah.
So when they talk about big bones, people, are they going to have more compact or more spongy parts?
Big bone is mostly a myth. If you are the same size, height as somebody else, you have the same size bones. There are some differences in sex, but yeah. Unless you have like acromegaly, which is like a growth hormone problem, then you'd have thicker bones, and I think it'd be, but I'm not sure, but I'm guessing it's more compact bone on top of it. Okay, so last we have fluid connective tissue, which includes blood and lymph. And when you see, we'll just mention lymph, but blood has these, smaller red blood cells called erythrocytes. Larger, often multi-lobed nucleated white blood cells called leukocytes. And then little fragments of cells, which are called thrombocytes, which are platelets. And there are a bunch of different kinds of white blood cells, which we'll go over in more detail in A&P2 when we talk about blood. But they are listed in the video lecture. But for now, don't worry about knowing all those. Just know you have white blood cells, which are bigger, red blood cells, smaller, and thrombocytes, little pieces of cells, which are important for blood clotting, called platelets. Okay, I think now would be a good place to stop. We do have a special musical number we're going to.
Yes.
All right, muscle tissue is relatively easy to differentiate between the two, or three, sorry. We have skeletal, go back to my red, cardiac, and smooth muscle. Skeletal muscle is going to be our voluntary movements of our body. They're going to attach to the skeleton. When you look at it under the microscope, it has these long cylindrical, stacked on top of each other cells. They have peripheral nuclei. And they have striations, all these little circular rings that go around these cells. All right, cardiac muscle looks very similar. Of course, cardiac muscle is involuntary. You can't just think about speeding up your heart rate and make it happen. It is under a part of your nervous system you don't have voluntary control over. Right, it is all found concentrated in the heart. It is similar to the skeletal muscle in that it is striated. So you do have these striations. But it is also branched, So you'll see branching in cardiac muscle, and you won't see branching in skeletal muscle. And then you see these thick discs between the cells called intercalated discs, which we know from the Kahoot are gap junctions, which allows synchronized communication between the cells, which is very important in your heart. You want your heart muscles to be beating in a way that's going to force blood out of your heart, or you'll die. So they have to all be communicating and coordinating that contraction. All right, smooth muscle is the one unlike the others. Okay, and is found mostly on the viscera, including hollow organs such as your blood cells, your intestines, your urinary tract. And it is not striated. It is a bunch of these spindle-shaped cells all packed together. Kind of like a squished chain link fence. Yeah, I think these are ones which are easy to learn because it's like you have a reference point for each. It's not just some abstract tissue. And they have clear characters for defining them. Yes?
Is there kind of a dumb question, but is there any relation between like the
Intercalated discs?
intercalated disc and an irregular heartbeat, or is that like not related at all?
Usually it's further upstream from that. It's the signal going to the heart muscle as a whole, which causes an arrhythmia. Yeah. All right, nervous tissue. Okay, nervous tissue has a very distinct shape. Unfortunately, we left it off the list for lab, so you won't have to look at it under the microscope. But most nervous tissue, which the cell would be called a neuron, has a receiving end with long projections and these are called dendrites. You have the kind of round mass called the cell body with the nucleus there. And then you have this kind of triangular shape called the axon hillock. Then the long part is called the axon. And then it ends, it may branch from there into the axon terminal. So that the way that the signal goes, it is received generally in the dendrites, travels down the axon hillock, through the axon, and then out these terminals to the next tissue, whether it's a neuron on the other side or a muscle tissue or a gland. And they have helper cells called glial cells. Or supportive tissue, supportive cells. One of which I'll mention here creates a fatty sheath called myelin. And so I'll have a bunch of these surrounding the axon, which allows the signal to transmit faster. Okay, so the cell responsible for making this, myelin, this is the cell, oligodendrocyte, or a Schwann cell, depending on where you are. All right, and then there's other glial cells which do different functions, but just know that they are helper cells for now. Supportive cells for the neurons.
Is the myelin itself a cell, or is that just?
No, it's a product of the cell. Eventually, when it matures, then it still stays attached to the oligodendrocyte, but it's part of the cell.
So there are a bunch of different types of glial cells.
There's 6 different types. 2 are in the peripheral nervous system, and then 4 are in the central nervous system. We'll get into those when we talk about the nervous system. All right, any questions there? Okay. All right, so this is just for you to kind of go through and, all right, can you name the 4 major tissue types? There's kind of a lot of lists to go through, and it's easy to get them mixed up. So you may think, oh yeah, I know the 4 major tissue types, but you are naming, the 3 different types of cartilage or, whatever. So make sure you kind of get these lists down and you know what you're talking about. You know which things go with which. It's a lot of terms to kind of put in your head at once. So this is one way to quiz yourself. Do things out of order, quiz each other, whatever, so that you can correctly contextualize the list in the right place. Okay, last thing we're going to go over, unless I decide to do more, is tissue repair. All right, and so this is the general process for what happens when there's tissue damage, okay? And we're going to use the epithelium on the outer layer here, and then you may have you'll have connective tissue and something else underneath. Okay, but let's say you get a fissure, some cut in here. And the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to have bleeding. And so you'll have clotting proteins coming together at this point to prevent clotting and eventually form a scab. And then you'll also have signals going into the bloodstream called histamines, which is going to activate the inflammation response. And what happens with inflammation is you start to get fluid in the area and a collection of white blood cells, okay? Because what they want to do is you've just exposed this internal environment to the external world. There's lots of germs and bacteria and debris out there, and you want to get rid of that as soon as possible so infection doesn't continue. So inflammation and the collection of white blood cells are going to occur there. All right, and then you'll have a number of, once that has kind of been all resolved, you'll have the formation of granulation tissue. And essentially what you have are fibroblasts growing fibers into the tissue. And in addition to that, you're going to need a blood supply because you're going to have a lot more mitogenic activity here. So you're going to call capillaries, more capillaries to the space. And while that is occurring, you're also going to have the epithelium replacing itself. Okay, so the epithelium will eventually push this scab off. Starting at the bottom. And forming new epithelium, we'll draw a little scab on top. But pushing the scab away from the surface. And eventually it's going to look like there was nothing there. You're also going to have, let's see, macrophages. Okay, and what they're going to do is they're going to eat the old debris, essentially. As the fibers are going in there and replacing the scab tissue, you're going to have to get rid of that tissue somehow, and the macrophages are going to digest that and get rid of it. And so finally, after this process of fibers has been inserted, the blood is no longer needed, you'll be left with some healed tissue, but it will form a scar. Can't really see that. I'll do it black. You won't be able to see it on the epithelium if the damage is small enough. But underneath, you'll still have some scar tissue where essentially the fibers that were in that process for healing that tissue didn't quite form the same way as the original tissue. And so they're a little bit more branched and mixed up. And so it forms this noticeably different tissue than the rest. And that's going to be your scar tissue. But eventually that scab will be completely gone. Won't be able to tell from the epithelium what damage was there, but it will leave a scar underneath. And then that's tissue repair. Yes?
So is that why when scabs get ripped off, they sometimes bleed as much as they don't because the skin is already healed pretty much?
Yeah, so depending on how much, how close it is to being healed. If it's still attached to that underlying layer, which is vascular, then you'll get blood. If you leave the scab alone and just let it fall off by itself, you shouldn't have bleeding. Yeah. All right, any other questions? Yes.